I've clicked onto the Global Tropical Overview for November the 12th, 2023. As is always the case in these videos, the weather expression are mine alone. And when making decisions ahead of any tropical cyclones, look to your local weather office, local emergency management, and local tropical cyclone warning center. So we're starting off once again today in the Atlantic as we are going to continue to look at the Caribbean over the coming days for potential development. But just a quick look over the Atlantic as we are getting further into November. You can see we're really getting more and more unfavorable across the tropics. We've got still screaming trade winds across the Caribbean, and look at all the upper level cirrus streaming westwards across the Caribbean and the MDR. That is all the shear that we've been wanting across the tropical Atlantic this whole season, finally coming in, and that is really shutting down everything in the MDR. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's it for the MDR, which makes sense. The tropical wave season that we had, a couple months ago, it's really stopped by now. I'd say Tammy was the last storm to form from that until, who knows until when. It could be June, or it could be all the way into the peak of next hurricane season. But we'll talk about next hurricane season when we get there. For now, we're going to focus on the Caribbean as there is still potential for development. So the pattern is generally the same. As we talked about, we're going to have an upper trough digging in over the Gulf of Mexico, and you can see that here on the 200 millibar plot from the GFS. We've got this upper trough digging in. This is going to help bring moisture up from the Caribbean, and you can also see that we have an anticyclonic high aloft over the area in southern Caribbean. So we have fairly favorable environment overall, and it does look like development is more likely today than it was a couple days ago when I made my video. You can see here's a GFS. It has a tropical cyclone developing here with a 995 millibar low there near Jamaica next weekend. So that is a little bit more confidence there. And also note, the GFS is not bombing the system out like it was a couple days ago. Like I mentioned with the GFS, it went very strong with that low, and now that we're getting closer to formation time of the actual precursor system, it is now backing away. Just something to always keep in mind with the GFS in the Caribbean. Now, the difference today primarily is that the European model is now on board with this idea. And let me go to the 850 millibar vorticity chart. And you can see it is now much more onto the idea of potentially a tropical cyclone forming here as it gets lifted north through Jamaica and Cuba and near Hispaniola. This is a difference from a couple of days ago, because if you remember, I showed a run on that video that I made a couple of days ago that the European had not developed it at all. Rather, what it had did on that run was it had stretched out so much, the moisture was being stretched out from the upper trough, that it just never got the chance to develop overall. Now, I should mention that is still a possibility here. It is still possible that the system does not form, obviously, and the main reason, or one of the main factors that could cause it, is a lot of the moisture is going to get strung out as a trough moves through. I'll go to the upper level map here. You can see again, here's the trough and here's all the strong winds aloft. This is going to help pull a lot of that moisture away. And so while the trough at first is going to help the system develop, help the precursor develop, it's going to end up potentially hurting it. As you can see, all this moisture just gets stretched out, and this is not what you want for a tropical cyclone. What you want is a concentrated ball of moisture around the center. But in this case, we have some moisture around the center, but a lot of it's getting strung out over a large region, and this could prove detrimental to formation. But, of course, development is only one thing. Keep in mind that even if we don't get a tropical cyclone developing here, this is a lot of deep tropical moisture being pulled up pretty far north, and it's coming right through Jamaica, Cuba, Hispaniola, the Turks and Caicos, and you can even see some of this moisture could even get up towards Bermuda. So even if we don't get a system developing out of this, we could still get a lot of rainfall here. And a lot of these areas in this part of the Caribbean are very mountainous, and having a lot of rainfall and moisture coming to those mountainous terrains can easily cause a lot of heavy rainfall in a short period of time, and that may be of concern for that. Now, this is the National Hurricane Center Tropical Weather Outlook. They've upped their odds to about 50%, which makes sense given that we have the European and the GFS, our main two global models, on board with development here. and we'll see exactly how it pans out. Would be interesting to see if we get another name this year. I think the next name is Vince on the naming list, which I think the last time that was used was 2005, so it's been a while since that name has been used. Now, before I go to the West Pacific for our next system, I want to quickly touch on another scenario here for the system as it gets lifted north. You see here on the European, I'm going to go back to the 200 millibar flow. Note the position of the trough on this run particularly. It's over Florida and it digs down east of the Yucatan Peninsula. In a scenario where this trough is perhaps a little bit faster, you can see here, this is a run from yesterday where the trough is a little bit faster. You can see now it's, I guess, draped from the Carolinas down to Cuba. This could allow the trough to move out quicker. And there's potential here, if this does play out, to where it could miss the storm in the Caribbean and it actually just gets left behind from the trough in the Caribbean. And you can see in the European run from yesterday that actually happens. It tries to get lifted north and comes about towards Hispaniola, but then it gets stuck. And now it gets underneath an upper level ridge on the model. And on the model itself from yesterday, it actually starts strengthening. Of course, this is, some scenario in the long range of this model. So there's no guarantee that this would occur. If it does get missed by the trough, there's also the potential it could just not develop at all if the environment does, stay unfavorable. But that's something to consider, that if it does miss the trough, we may have to watch it a little bit more in the Caribbean. And when the European shows you something, something like this in the longer range, it sort of grabs your attention just with how the model can be. But at the same time, we've seen the model several times this year go long range and show weird solutions with storms like Hurricane Tammy back a month ago. But it ended up not verifying to that degree that the European had showed. So we just got to pay attention to that, and that's just another scenario I wanted to mention before I moved on. But now we're going to move on to the West Pacific as we have Tropical Depression 17 now here. Just to orient yourself, this is the island of Palau, and way over here on the left side of your screen, this is the southern Philippines. So this is pretty far south, well into the deep tropics, and this is a fairly compact system. And over the coming days, the environment is not going to be overly favorable for the system. There will be some shear, but there is room for some intensification as the system comes towards the Philippines, and we may have to deal with some tropical storm impacts as the system makes its way west. Now this is a 200 millibar flow plot from the GFS. Now the GFS is doing a bit poor with this initialization of the system. And I can show you the system's actually here. It's actually initializing it way too weak, it looks like, on its vorticity plot. So we're not really seeing an area of low pressure marked on the 200 millibar plot, but I might be able to get one if I go a little bit further. Yeah, there we go. But you can see the stronger flow. We have this large ridge draped across the upper levels, and this is bringing a lot of increased westerly flow over the system. Now, the system is tracking west, but if I get a sounding from the GFS, you can see that we have stronger easterly winds aloft compared to the low levels. So that is a little bit of shear, and this can cause a system to tilt with height. So you have, say you have I guess I can give an example. Say you have a graph and the y-axis is height, and say this is about 500 millibars and this is the surface down here, and you have the low level center here, but because you have the stronger flow aloft from the shear in the mid to upper levels, the mid-level center will actually be displaced over here. So you've got a little bit of tilt with height like that. And that's more unfavorable for tropical cyclones. If you want a tropical cyclone to intensify, you want these centers to be stacked, not tilted. And that's something that the system will probably have to deal with given that stronger flow aloft. And you can see as I go in time on the GFS, this flow really does not back off too much. You can see the GFS tries to get it to deepen a little bit, but overall it fails to really strengthen all too much until we get towards 7 days and the system then is near the Philippines and we actually get a more favorable upper level pattern. But of course, this is several days out, and this does differ between the GFS and the European, which the European I'll show now. You can also see that this pattern looks the same, general upper level ridge over the tropical Pacific, generally bringing that stronger flow aloft to the system. But you can see as the system comes west, we start to get the system really just not well, actually, we don't start to get anything. We just see the system struggle a lot. And then by the time, we get to 7 days, maybe it gets a little bit more favorable on the model, but it doesn't intensify too much on the European. Now, a keen eye would also note that we had another area of low pressure form on the GFS way back here by the Mariana Islands. This is Invest 96W behind it, and this does have potential for development. But this is more uncertain pattern-wise, I'd say, between the two models, more so than 17W. You can see on the GFS, we actually have a good bit of outflow on the southwest side. This would be favorable for the system, and it makes sense why the GFS does show this to strengthen right before it comes to Guam. But on the European model, we've got this strong upper ridge, which, while the system is moving this way, the ridge is bringing flow like this. So you have a pretty significant cross flow there, and that's pretty significant shear, and rightfully so on the European, we don't have an actual tropical cyclone on this. We have nothing formed, and that makes sense because this shear would be detrimental to a forming tropical cyclone here. So that's a little bit of uncertainty on 96W's end, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. For those in the Mariana Islands, it's just important that you stay tuned to the National Weather Service there. They'll have information on that ahead of time. But for the Philippines ahead of 17W, it does look like, now looking at this again with the European and the GFS, it will eventually have a more favorable environment with this upper ridge. And from that, we could get the system to intensify some. Now, the good news is it really doesn't start to get favorable until the system gets right up towards your coastline. So we're not going to be seeing the system rapidly intensifying into, say, a super typhoon before it comes in. We're probably going to see the system, at least for now, be a tropical storm when it comes in. Could it become a typhoon? Given enough time, absolutely, in this environment. And we'll have to keep an eye on that over the coming days. All right, we're now going to move to the South Pacific as we have Invest 91P, I believe it's 2F by the Fiji Meteorological Service. And you can see this system is looking pretty good across the South Pacific. This looks like a developing tropical cyclone here. And really at this stage, we have to ask ourselves, what does the system look like underneath the clouds? We have a closed low level center beneath that. Now, we don't have an ASCAP pass, but we do have a high pass from earlier today. And I'm a bit weary using these passes that they can have some biases to showing closed centers. So I'd say take a little bit more of a word of caution when looking at this, but this does show a general broad and closed low level center, it looks like on this run, or on this pass. And it does look like I am more inclined to believe that. I'd wait for an ASCAP pass before fully calling it a tropical cyclone right now, or maybe a microwave pass. But right now, this looks like a developing tropical cyclone. Your classic look in the South Pacific. Now, as well as the convective development near the center, look at the outflow here in the upper level cirrus streaming away from the system. The system will have a jet interaction taking shape, and I could show you this here on the GFS. As the system comes towards Fiji, we have this trough here, or jet rather, south of Fiji, and this system's outflow is feeding right in to that entrance region. Now, the limiting factor here is going to be sea surface temperatures. Like I mentioned a couple days ago, the sea surface temperatures in the early season are not overly favorable for strong tropical cyclones unless you're really far north like you had with Lola a couple weeks ago. In this case, we have sea surface temperatures already decreasing where the system is going, and by the time it gets to Fiji, the waters are nearing the 26-degree isotherm. And once it gets below 26 degrees, then that will likely start weakening as it tracks further south. So this will be the main limiting factor. Now, if it plays all of its cards right, I'd say it does have some potential to, ramp up to maybe a cyclone that's Category 1 in Saffir-Simpson. Maybe Category 3 local scale, I believe is the equivalent there. But I wouldn't say it's overly likely. One reason being the system is fairly broad, and it may take a bit more time for that system to intensify its winds up to cyclone force. But given the jet interaction, it could absolutely happen while it's over warm sea surface temperatures. But for now, this is the Fiji Meteorological Service forecast cone. You can see this is generally taking this west of the Fiji Islands. It looks like we had a shift in guidance from yesterday. Yesterday we had the system tracking on model guidance a little bit more over Fiji, but now it looks like we're getting a more westward track here, which is good, but you can see there is still potential wind radii coming over the island, so make sure you stay tuned to the Fiji Met Service for the latest information on how to prepare ahead of the system. But of course, keep in mind this is a track cone, so anywhere within this cone the system could come, and there is still potential for the system to come towards Fiji, and you can see the intensity track here having a category 2 on the scale coming right towards your region, so that could be a significant hit for an early season storm. But it is cyclone season, just another reminder, so make sure you have your cyclone preparedness kit, not only in the South Pacific, but across Australia and into the southwestern Indian Ocean, particularly in areas like Mauritius, La Reunion, Madagascar, and Mozambique, and along the coastline of Africa, as it's very important to be prepared ahead of these storms so you're not rushing to prepare while the system comes your way. All right, we're finally going to move to the North Indian Ocean as we still have potential development here across the Bay of Bengal. Now, things have changed a little bit. We had talked about a couple of days ago, how a system was forecast to come into the Andaman Sea and then forecast to come into the Bay of Bengal, and then it would recurve and likely develop here in the northern Bay of Bengal. We have seen a bit of a shift in both the GFS and European models to some disruption in that development cycle. Now I'm showing you the 850 millibar vorticity plot mainly to show you this large trough just streamed across the entire Bay of Bengal. You can note where it is if you look at the winds. We have some winds curving into the westerly direction on the southern side, and then you've got easterly winds on the northern side of that, and between here you've got your trough axis. Now the fly in the ointment here is we have another area of low pressure trying to develop near India on these models, and this is disrupting the development of the eastern system overall. And you'll actually see on the GFS that the system on the west side actually tries to develop fully, and we get a pretty tight vorticity signature, and that disrupts the system quite a bit, and we don't get the system fully developed here until it gets into the northern Bay of Bengal. And this could be good news because we, as I talked about, have a favorable jet interaction taking shape. But if we get this other low to disrupt the system enough to where it can't develop until it gets really far up towards the coastline, that can limit the amount of strengthening it has from the jet interaction. And the good news is here, the GFS is not alone in this idea. Here's a European model. Here's the same general pattern with the winds on the south side, winds on the north side. Here's your trough, and here's a lobe of low pressure near southern India, and here's another area of increased vorticity near the Andaman Sea. And you can see the secondary area of low pressure tries to develop, and the one that came out of the Andaman Sea struggles more on this run. And it doesn't really develop at all on the European. It actually just comes in as a broad area of low pressure, it looks like on this run. So there is good news today with that system, and hopefully this sticks. Of course, things can change over the coming days. We're talking about development more likely mid to late week, so there will be things changing as they've changed over the past couple of days, but hopefully we can have this pattern stick, because if we get a system developed earlier, especially with the upper level pattern that I showed you, this could be volatile for a rapid intensification event, and I think we've had enough of these jet interactions this year. We've had so many that have come right towards land, so I'd be happy to see one of these jet interactions fail for once, so that we have just a weak tropical cyclone or no tropical cyclone at all coming into this region. But it's something to pay attention to, and make sure you stay tuned to the Indian Meteorological Department, and I'll leave links to all the weather offices like I did in my last video at the top of the description, so you can just skip ahead to all those websites. But that's all that I've got for today. Same 4 systems that we're probably going to be talking about for the next several days, but for all those ahead of the storms coming your way that could potentially develop, stay safe, and I'll have future videos out throughout the week talking about all of these in more detail. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching.